Caleb Walker stepped into the Whitmore mansion still wearing his waiter's uniform, the fabric carrying the faint scent of coffee and cold rain from his shift. Every head turned. Men in tailored suits laughed openly. A woman in pearls covered her mouth and whispered to her friend. Vanessa Whitmore crossed the marble floor, her smile sharp as glass. "Who let the help wander into the VIP section?" Her mother Elaine added coldly. "A single father playing dress-up in our world. How sad." They had no idea who Caleb really was. And tonight, that mistake would cost them everything. The rain hadn't stopped since noon. Caleb Walker stood under the awning of a small bistro on 5th and Marshall, watching steam rise from a sewer grate, while the manager inside handled a refund dispute. He had owned the bistro for almost 3 years, registered under a holding name none of the staff recognized. Tonight, like most nights, he wore the same plain black uniform as the rest of the crew. He preferred it that way. People showed him their real faces when they thought he didn't matter, and Caleb had learned to read those faces the way other men read balance sheets. His phone buzzed against the counter. Marcus Green, his attorney, calling for the 3rd time that evening. "Whitmore's expecting you in 40 minutes, Caleb. The audit team is already on standby. You sure you don't want a car?" Caleb glanced down at his uniform, the coffee stain on his cuff, the rain darkening one shoulder. "I'll drive myself," he said quietly. "Keep the auditors close. I want them ready the moment I send the signal." Marcus exhaled on the other end of the line. "You're walking into a Whitmore party dressed like that?" Caleb almost smiled. "Let's see what they show me when they think I'm no one." He had built Walker Holdings quietly over 10 years, taking failing companies the market had written off and putting them back together, one piece at a time. The press never had his face. Most of his own executives had never met him in person. After his wife passed, he had stepped further into the background, letting the board run the public side, while he traveled between his businesses unnoticed, watching how managers spoke to dishwashers and how owners spoke to drivers. Character. He had decided long ago did not reveal itself in boardrooms. It revealed itself in the small spaces when no one important was looking. The Whitmore mansion sat at the end of a long private drive lined with imported magnolias. From the gate, he could already hear the orchestra. White lights wrapped around every column, and the doors stood open for arriving guests in furs and pressed tuxedos. He parked his sedan 2 streets down and walked the rest of the way. The rain kept falling lightly on his shoulders, and by the time he reached the entrance, his uniform was darker still, his shoes carrying flecks of gravel from the drive. Inside, the marble foyer opened into a ballroom that smelled of champagne and orchids. A string quartet played near the staircase. Vanessa Whitmore stood at the center of it all, a champagne flute balanced between 2 fingers, her gown the color of dark wine. She was beautiful in the practiced way of women raised to be photographed, and she laughed at every joke a half-second too long. Beside her, her mother Elaine surveyed the room like a banker counting deposits, while her father Richard worked the crowd of investors with the slow confidence of a man who believed his own performance. Caleb stepped through the doorway, and conversations near the entrance faltered. A waiter carrying a silver tray nearly walked into him, frowned, and stepped around without apology. The first laugh came from a man in a charcoal suit who turned to his wife and said something Caleb couldn't quite hear. The second laugh came louder, then a third. Within seconds, half the room was looking at him the way people look at a stain on an expensive rug. Vanessa's smile dropped the moment she spotted him. She crossed the marble floor in long, sharp strides, her heels striking the stone like small hammers. "Excuse me," she said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of guests to hear. "The service entrance is around the back. Whoever sent you up here is going to lose their job tonight." Caleb met her eyes and said nothing. The silence seemed to offend her more than any answer could have, and her jaw tightened in a way she clearly did not realize was visible. Elaine appeared at her daughter's shoulder a moment later, drawn by the disturbance the way a cat is drawn by motion. She looked Caleb over from his damp collar to his scuffed shoes and let out a small, performative sigh. "A single father, playing dress-up in our world," she murmured just barely under her breath. "Some people simply can't read a room." Then louder to the man beside her, "Henry, would you find the catering manager and tell him that one of his boys has wandered into the wrong section? A guest near the bar, an older man with silver hair, Caleb had once seen briefly at a closed-door investor, briefing on the East Coast, narrowed his eyes and stepped forward. "Wait a moment," he said slowly. "I think I recognize—" Vanessa cut him off with a bright, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, don't encourage him. He's clearly the type who tells everyone he meets that he's somebody important." She turned back to Caleb, lowering her voice to a hiss. "If you came here to impress someone tonight, you've picked the wrong house." Caleb still said nothing. He simply folded his hands behind his back, the way he often did when listening, and watched her. Around them, the room settled into a strange new rhythm, the kind of quiet where people pretend not to be listening, but do not move an inch. Elaine, sensing an audience, now lifted a champagne flute from a passing tray and pressed it firmly into Caleb's hand, then placed an empty silver tray beside it. "There. Now you look like you belong. Make yourself useful and bring some of these to the gentleman near the fireplace. Earn the right to stand in this room." A few guests laughed under their breath. One woman whispered something to her husband and shook her head as if she'd just witnessed an embarrassment on Caleb's behalf. Vanessa folded her arms and waited for him to either argue or storm out. Both reactions Caleb knew would have given her exactly what she wanted, a story to tell at the next dinner party about the desperate man who had tried to crash her event. He gave her neither. Instead, he lifted the tray, balanced it the way he had taught his own staff to balance theirs, and gave a small, even nod. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected, steadier. "Whatever helps the evening run smoothly." Something flickered across Elaine's face, surprise maybe that he had not crumbled, but she covered it quickly with a tight smile and waved him toward the fireplace, as if dismissing a gardener. As Caleb turned, he caught a glimpse of Richard Whitmore at the far end of the ballroom, deep in conversation with two men in dark suits. Richard had not even noticed the small theater his wife and daughter had staged near the entrance. He was busy explaining something, gesturing widely, smiling the kind of smile a man smiles when he is selling something he is not entirely sure he owns. Caleb filed that observation away with the rest. He moved through the ballroom carrying the tray, and the guests parted for him, the way they would part for any servant, which was to say without seeing him at all. He heard fragments of conversation as he passed, a woman complaining about her decorator, a man bragging about a yacht he had not actually purchased yet, two younger investors agreeing in low voices that the Whitmore numbers didn't quite line up, but that the family name was still worth the risk. Each sentence landed inside him like a coin dropped into a deep well. He could hear all of them clearly. By the time he reached the fireplace, Caleb had already made his decision. He could have ended the evening with a single phone call. Marcus and the audit team were 10 minutes away. One word from him, and Walker Holdings would walk out of this deal before midnight, the Whitmores none the wiser. But walking out now would teach them nothing. They would simply find another investor, another Mark, another room full of people willing to perform for them, and the people who actually worked for them, the ones whose paychecks were being trimmed to keep these chandeliers lit, would still be standing in the dark. He set the tray down on the marble mantel and looked back across the ballroom. Vanessa was already laughing again, leaning into a circle of investors, her hand resting briefly on the arm of a man twice her age. Elaine watched her daughter with the satisfied expression of a craftswoman admiring her own work. Across the room, near a tall window streaked with rain, a woman in a dark gray dress stood slightly apart from the crowd, her arms folded, her eyes following the same circle of investors with something Caleb could only describe as exhaustion. She did not laugh when the others laughed. She did not lift her glass when the others lifted theirs. Caleb noted her, the way he noted everything tonight, and picked up the empty tray again. He stepped back into the crowd, slowly, the wet hem of his uniform brushing against the marble. He would not be the man they had been waiting for tonight. He would be the man they had failed to see. And before this party ended, every word they had spoken about him would be returned to them in full with interest. For the next half hour, Caleb moved through the Whitmore ballroom, carrying trays he did not need to carry, and the room rewrote itself around him with every step. People who would have shaken his hand on any other night now looked through him as if he were furniture. A woman in a green silk gown handed him her empty glass without breaking the rhythm of her sentence. A man laughed loudly and dropped a crumpled napkin onto Caleb's tray, as if the tray itself had asked for it. None of them looked at his face. That more than anything else told him what kind of room he was in. He passed a circle of younger guests near the bar, and one of them a man no older than 30, with a watch that cost more than most people's cars, was holding court on the subject of working fathers. "My driver has 3 of them," he said, swirling his drink, "always asking for advances, always talking about how hard it is, as if the rest of us aren't tired too." The women around him laughed politely. Caleb refilled the bowl of olives on the bar and kept moving. He had grown used to hearing himself discussed in the third person tonight, as if he weren't standing 2 feet away. Vanessa, for her part, had decided that Caleb was useful. Whenever she wanted to highlight her own grace, she summoned him with a small flick of her fingers, took a glass from his tray, without thanking him, and resumed her conversation, as if a vending machine had just dispensed her a drink. Twice she made jokes at his expense, within his hearing, both designed for the investor standing beside her, both delivered with the easy cruelty of someone who had never been on the other side of one. The investors laughed. Caleb refilled their glasses. He memorized their faces. He noticed something else as the evening wore on. The real waiters, the ones who had worked the catering circuit in this city for years, were watching him too. They could tell he was not one of them. His balance was wrong, his folds too sharp, the way he set down a glass too deliberate. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes and a small scar above her lip, finally caught his sleeve in the hallway, between the kitchen and the ballroom. "You're not staff," she said quietly. "I don't know what you're doing, but be careful. They make examples out of people in this house." Caleb thanked her, and meant it. She was the first person inside that mansion who had spoken to him as if he were a person. He was returning from the kitchen when he heard the voices behind a tall set of oak doors slightly ajar. The doors led into Richard Whitmore's private study, and from the angle of the hallway, no one inside could see him. He should have walked past. Any other night with any other family he would have, but he heard his own name spoken in the wrong tone, and his feet stopped before his mind decided. "He's already on his way," Richard was saying, his voice lower than it had been all evening, stripped of its public warmth. "Walker's representative confirmed it 3 days ago. Whoever he sends, we treat like royalty. We give him the tour, we give him the numbers, we give him the smile. He signs, and we breathe again." Elaine's voice cut in next, dry and impatient. "And if he asks about the Holloway accounts," Richard let out a small, ugly laugh. "He won't. He's an investor. He wants the story, not the receipts. Nobody at his level reads receipts anymore. They read rooms." Caleb stood very still in the hallway. Through the gap in the doors, he could see the edge of Vanessa's wine-colored gown, where she leaned against her father's desk. "Daddy, you worry too much," she said. Her voice carried a different texture, in private. Sharper, less rehearsed. "These people don't want the truth. They want to feel like they're betting on winners. We give them a winner's house, a winner's daughter, a winner's name, and the money writes itself. That's how it's always worked." Elaine's voice followed lower still. "Rich people don't need to be kind, Vanessa. They only need to look like the kind of people who deserve to be trusted. Remember that, and you'll never lose another deal in your life." Richard's voice came back softer, now almost tender, the way a man speaks when he is admitting something he has decided to be proud of. "The Holloway numbers will hold for another 6 months if we keep the contracts moving. By then, Walker's money will be in the account, and we'll have rotated the bad paper out before any auditor knows where to look. It's not fraud, it's choreography." Caleb heard the clink of a glass. He heard Vanessa laugh. He heard his own pulse slow, and even in his ears. He stepped back from the doors before any of them noticed him, and he walked the long way around the ballroom to compose his face. He had come into this house tonight expecting arrogance. He had not expected a confession. The Whitmores were not simply rude people overestimating their position. They were running a deliberate operation, and the chandeliers above his head were paid for by the very pension lines and payroll cuts his audit team had flagged a week earlier. The party was not a party. It was bait. Once he was clear of the corridor, Caleb slipped his phone from his pocket and sent a single line to Marcus. "Bring them in. Front entrance. 20 minutes." He returned the phone to his jacket without waiting for the reply. He knew Marcus would already be moving. He was halfway across the corridor toward the ballroom when a hand touched his elbow. The woman in the dark gray dress, the one he had noticed by the window earlier, had stepped out from a small alcove and was watching him with an expression that did not match the rest of the house. "You're not a waiter," she said quietly. "I've been watching you for the last 20 minutes. Whoever you are, you should leave through the side garden. Now." Caleb studied her face. She was not afraid. She was tired in the specific way only people with a conscience inside a corrupt company ever become. "My name is Natalie Brooks," she added when he didn't answer. "I sit on the Whitmore Operations Board. I tried to flag what they're doing 6 months ago. They moved me sideways and stopped inviting me to the meetings that mattered. Tonight, I'm here because Richard wants the board photographed, not because anyone wants my opinion." She glanced behind her, then opened a small clutch and pressed a folded envelope into his hand. "I don't know who sent you, but I know what's inside that house. If you're investigating them, this is what you need. Holloway invoices, the shadow payroll, the contracts they keep rewriting every quarter. I've kept copies." Caleb looked down at the envelope, then back at her. "Why are you handing this to a man you think is a waiter?" Natalie almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Because no real waiter walks through this room the way you do, and because I'm out of better options." He slid the envelope inside his jacket without breaking eye contact. "Go back to the party," he told her. "Don't stand near me again tonight. Whatever happens in the next hour, you weren't part of it." She nodded once and disappeared back into the crowd, and Caleb felt the weight of the envelope settle against his chest like a verdict. He did not get the chance to leave quietly. The moment he stepped back into the ballroom, Vanessa's voice cut across the room, bright and theatrical, the kind of voice trained on stages. "There he is, our wandering waiter." Heads turned. The orchestra continued, but the conversations near her thinned. She walked toward him with her glass half raised, the smile of a woman who had decided that a public spectacle would entertain her guests better than another round of canapes. "You've been standing in my house for the better part of an hour," she said loud enough for the back of the room to hear, "and I think you owe everyone here an apology. You walked into a private event in that uniform and embarrassed my staff, my caterer, and frankly the rest of us who actually dressed for the evening." A few guests laughed nervously. Others stepped closer, scenting blood. Elaine watched from the side, her expression somewhere between amusement and approval. Caleb did not move. "Go on," Vanessa pressed, lifting her chin. "Apologize, and then take this tray and serve wine to my guests properly, since you seem to be auditioning for the position. Maybe if you do it well enough, I'll let you back in next year for the staff Christmas dinner." A man behind her snorted into his drink. Another whispered, "She's brutal tonight. with the kind of admiration weak men reserve for cruelty. They don't have the spine for themselves. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He thought about every word the Whitmores had said inside that study. He thought about Natalie's tired eyes. He thought about the young waitress in the hallway with the scar above her lip, and the cleaners who would scrub this marble floor at 4 a.m. for a wage Richard had decided was still generous. Then he gave Vanessa a small nod, lifted a fresh tray of wine glasses from a passing server, and began to circulate the room exactly as she had instructed. The ballroom watched. Some guests laughed openly now. Others looked away, sensing that something was wrong, but unable to name it. Vanessa basked in the moment, lifting her own glass in a mock toast as Caleb passed, and Elaine murmured to a friend, "You see, some men only understand their place when you put them in it." Caleb served the wine carefully, evenly, the way he served everything in his life. He did not speak. He did not look up. He let them have their performance, because he knew his own was about to begin. A small platform had been set up near the staircase for announcements, and Richard climbed it, now lifting a microphone with the practiced grin of a man who had rehearsed this moment all week. "Friends," he called out, and the room turned obediently toward him. "Tonight is more than a party. Tonight I am proud to share that the Whitmore Group has reached an agreement in principle with one of the most respected investment houses in the country. Walker Holdings will be partnering with us on our next chapter. Teal." The applause was immediate. Glasses lifted. Vanessa's smile widened into something close to ecstasy. Elaine placed a hand over her heart in a gesture clearly meant to be photographed. Across the room, Natalie Brooks went very still. Caleb set his tray down on the nearest table. He untied the small black apron at his waist, folded it once, and laid it neatly beside the tray. The side doors of the ballroom opened, and 3 figures in dark suits walked in, unannounced and unhurried. Marcus Green led them, flanked by 2 senior auditors carrying leather portfolios. Marcus was Walker Holdings' chief counsel, and he wore the calm of a man who had spent the last 20 minutes preparing for exactly this entrance. They did not look at Richard on the platform. They did not look at the orchestra, or the chandeliers, or the famous faces in the crowd. They walked straight across the marble floor toward the man in the damp waiter's uniform, standing alone by an empty tray. Marcus stopped a respectful step away, inclined his head, and spoke clearly enough for the entire room to hear. "Mr. Walker, we're ready when you are." The ballroom did not so much fall silent as collapse into it. The orchestra trailed off mid-phrase. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Richard Whitmore's smile remained frozen on the small platform near the staircase, his hand still raised in the gesture he had been making when Marcus spoke. Vanessa turned her head slowly, the wine in her glass tilting against the rim, and looked at the man she had been calling a wandering waiter for the last hour. Caleb stepped forward away from the empty tray and the folded apron on the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Every person in that room had already adjusted their hearing to him the moment Marcus had said his name. "Thank you, Marcus," he said quietly. "Please bring the team in." The auditors moved past him toward the platform, and Caleb walked the length of the ballroom in the same wet uniform he had worn through the front door, only now the marble floor seemed to part for him without anyone telling it to. Elaine reached for her daughter's arm and held it tightly. Vanessa was no longer smiling. Her face had gone the careful blank color of someone trying to remember every word she had spoken in the last 60 minutes. Richard lowered the microphone, and the small click of it against the wooden platform was the loudest sound in the room. Caleb climbed the 2 short steps and turned to face the guests, who less than 10 minutes earlier had been laughing while he served them their wine. "My name is Caleb Walker," he said. "I founded Walker Holdings 10 years ago. I'm the investor your hosts have been preparing this evening for." He let the sentence sit for a moment, not for drama, but because the room needed time to catch up. He could see the recognition moving from face to face in slow waves, like a light being switched on row by row. The man with the silver hair near the bar, the one who had almost named him earlier, closed his eyes briefly, the way a man closes his eyes when he realizes he has just witnessed a disaster he had seen coming. "I came here tonight the way I come to most of my decisions," Caleb went on. Quietly, without announcement. "I was running late from another business of mine, and I didn't have time to change. I considered apologizing for the uniform when I walked in. Instead, I was told I had wandered into the wrong room." He glanced toward Vanessa, then toward Elaine with no particular weight in his eyes. "I was told to apologize for embarrassing the staff. I was handed a tray and told to earn the right to stand here. So I did." A murmur moved through the crowd, low and uneasy. Caleb did not let it grow. "I'm not here to repeat what was said to me tonight. The people who said those things know exactly what they said, and so do the rest of you who laughed along." He looked toward the man with the expensive watch who had spoken about working fathers an hour earlier. The man could not hold his gaze for more than a second. "What concerns me more," Caleb continued, "is what was said when no one thought I could hear." He gestured toward Marcus, who opened the first leather portfolio and laid a stack of documents on the small podium beside him. "Walker Holdings was prepared 3 days ago to extend a significant capital partnership to the Whitmore Group. Our preliminary review flagged a number of inconsistencies, but our policy is to give every potential partner the chance to walk us through their numbers in person. Tonight was that chance." Richard stepped forward, his voice tight. "Caleb, whatever you think you overheard there is context. Every business performs a little. Every family in this room has had a hard quarter at some point. You're a businessman. You understand presentation." Caleb looked at him without anger, which was somehow worse. "I understand presentation, Richard. I also understand the difference between presenting a business and dressing one up to hide it. The Holloway accounts, the shadow payroll, the contracts you've been rotating to keep the bad paper moving. I heard you describe it as choreography. That isn't choreography. That's fraud." A sharp intake of breath ran through the room. One of the investors near the wall set down his glass and quietly began making his way toward the doors. Then another. Vanessa stepped forward, her hand half raised, the practiced charm switching back, on the way a stage light switches back on. "Mr. Walker, please, if I said anything earlier that offended you, I am so deeply, sincerely sorry. I had no idea." Caleb met her eyes, and the apology died in her throat before she could finish the sentence. "That's the part I want you to hear." "Vanessa," he said evenly, "you're not sorry for what you said. You're sorry that I am the person you said it to. There is a very large difference between those two apologies, and everyone in this room understands which one you just offered." Her face changed, then slowly, the smile cracking at the edges. Elaine tried to step in beside her, lifting her chin in the practiced way of a woman accustomed to controlling rooms. "Mr. Walker, surely we can discuss this privately. There's no need to humiliate my daughter in front of—" "You humiliated yourselves," Caleb said quietly. "I'm only finishing the sentence." He turned toward the rest of the guests. "Walker Holdings is withdrawing from the proposed partnership with the Whitmore Group, effective immediately. Our legal team will be filing for an independent forensic audit of the company's last 3 years of operations on Monday morning. Any investor in this room currently exposed to Whitmore positions should consider this their notice to consult their own counsel." The trickle toward the doors became a steady walk. Coats appeared. Phones came out. By the time Caleb finished speaking, more than a third of the ballroom was already in the foyer. Richard sat down heavily on the edge of the platform, the microphone forgotten in his lap. Elaine's hand had fallen from her daughter's arm and now hovered uselessly at her side, as if she had forgotten what arms were for. Vanessa stood very still in the center of the marble floor, her wine-colored gown suddenly looking less like a statement and more like a costume someone had forgotten to take off. None of them looked at each other. That, Caleb noted, was always the first thing to break in families like this. He stepped down from the platform and crossed the room toward Natalie Brooks, who had moved to the side of the orchestra and stood watching with her arms folded, the same exhausted posture she had worn all evening. "You did the right thing," he told her quietly. "Walker Holdings is going to need someone inside the restructuring of whatever survives of this company. Someone who understands the operations and isn't afraid to put real numbers on a real page. If you want that seat, it's yours." Natalie looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small, careful nod, the kind a person gives when they are not yet ready to feel relieved, but know they will be soon. He walked out of the Whitmore mansion the same way he had walked in his damp uniform, past the magnolias and the wet drive, and the line of cars, whose owners were no longer interested in being photographed at the door. Marcus held the side gate open for him. "You all right?" he asked. Caleb looked back once at the lit windows. "I will be," he said. "Send the audit team in on Monday and get a release ready for the staff. I want every catering worker, every cleaner, and every paid late employee in that house contacted personally. They didn't sign up for this." In the months that followed, the Whitmore name moved through the financial press the way wreckage moves down a river. Richard was forced out of the executive chair by a board that had spent years pretending not to notice. Elaine's invitations stopped arriving, and the social circle she had spent 30 years assembling closed around her, like a door she could no longer find the handle on. Vanessa lost her position as the public face of the brand within a week. The lifestyle that had defined her entire identity dissolved quietly without ceremony into a small apartment her mother could no longer afford to furnish. Walker Holdings did not buy Whitmore Group. Caleb made sure of that. Instead, the audit team identified the operating divisions that were salvageable, separated them from the inflated parent company, and placed them under new oversight. Natalie Brooks took the operations seat she had been offered, and within 6 months, the staff who had been quietly underpaid for years received partial restitution, signed off personally by the new board. Among the names on that list was a young woman with a small scar above her lip, who had once spoken to Caleb in a hallway as if he were a person. It wasn't justice in any complete sense. Caleb knew that. But it was more justice than the people in that ballroom had ever planned to deliver. Caleb went back to his quiet routine. He still walked into his own restaurants in a plain black uniform once or twice a week, and most of his managers still didn't recognize him on sight. He found in time that he did not need to tell anyone what had happened that night at the Whitmore mansion. The story moved on its own the way true stories tend to, and somewhere in the city, in kitchens and back hallways and side entrances, people who had once been invisible were being looked in the eye again.